name is Alicia Shapiro with AInews.com, and welcome to another episode of our Driving Tomorrow Conversations with Industry Leaders, where we explore the real world impact of artificial intelligence across industries. Today, I'm excited to be speaking with Darren Kimura, CEO of AISquared, a company focused on helping enterprises and federal agencies operationalize AI inside the systems where work actually happens. Darren brings a rare combination of founder, investor, and operator experience with more than $1.23 billion in enterprise value creation, $350 million raised in startup equity, and leadership across multiple high growth technology companies. Today, AI Squared is helping organizations solve what many are calling the last mile problem of AI adoption, moving from pilots to demos to secure, measurable business outcomes inside real workflows. In today's conversation, we'll explore why so many AI deployments stall, where agentic AI is delivering real value versus where expectations are running ahead of reality, and what it really takes for businesses to move from pilots to measurable operational impact. So I appreciate you joining us today, Darren.
Hey, Alicia, good to see you again, and thanks for
Yeah.
having me.
Oh, absolutely. So good to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to our talk today. So let's start with the big picture. AI adoption is moving fast, and many companies are starting to realize that deploying AI successfully is much harder than buying access to a model. So, from your perspective, where are businesses most often getting it wrong when they think they are ready for AI?
Oh, wow, that's a pretty big question. I think across our customer base, which is largely the federal government as well as large enterprises, what we tend to see is a lot of enthusiasm around innovation. And what that means is a lot of funding, ideas around cool AI use cases, but not necessarily a focus on ROI yet. And the gap there is that when these projects are going for sustainment dollars, like money to continue to pay for it as it goes into production, they're not funded properly because the ROI isn't yet clear. So at some point between the chief of AI and the CFO, there's a gap. And one of the things that we try to do is in our process of discovery, when we're trying to identify what projects to work on first, is really try to make sure organizations think through that gap. So making sure that, for example, when we build an AI workflow, a use case for them, that we identify things that will help it to get budget to be sustained into the long-term future.
And we just mentioned about the last mile problem in AI where organizations are investing heavily, but they're, like you said, struggling to find that real value and return on investment. So, why does that gap happen so often? And what usually breaks first that they realize we need to
Yeah.
fix this?
The last mile problem is pretty complicated because it's slightly different for different organizations.
Okay.
What we think about as being the last mile is really delivering the AI results to the end user. And how do you do that? Where do you do that? How do you do that securely? Those are all pretty challenging things to address. So today, if you think about the way many people use AI, you're thinking about maybe ChatGPT or it's a chatbot. So you go into the chatbot, you input some text, and it does its thinking and brings you back an answer. So that's one way to do it. And to do that, you probably go to their website and you type in the URL, or you may have a local piece of software running, a client running, and you use that as well. The reality, though, is AI is so much more than just a chatbot response. It could be things like activating a variety of different models and data sources to deliver a combination of pieces of information to you. And where and how do you do that? For the most part, people have applications that they work with today. Maybe a favorite application, maybe it's Salesforce or HubSpot or SAP or Workday. It depends on your job function. You're probably looking in some piece of software every day.
Mhm.
And the way we think about solving that last mile problem is we want to bring the AI power into that app for you. Now, that app is probably designing its own AI today, most are, but they're probably designing it with the data within their own ecosystem. So we have to make sure that we pull data from all these different locations that you store your data today. They could be on simple things like Google Drive or Box. It could be in S3 buckets. It could be in more complicated data lakes or data warehouses. It could be in SaaS applications. But for you, the end user, to make good decisions, you need to have data from a variety of different data locations.
Right.
So you want to have that checked off. You want to make sure that you run the appropriate models, which are fairly easy to do today. And you want to have those insights where you work. And
Mhm.
really solving those three things together is what we're trying to do by solving for the last mile.
I love that. And AI squared is bringing AI directly into the business applications that people already are using rather than forcing teams to adopt entirely new systems. So, why is that approach so important for adoption? What changes when AI meets the people inside their existing workflow? And what is your approach to reducing that token cost for enterprises?
Wow. A couple key points here when it comes to AI adoption and sustainment. The first one is trust.
Mhm.
You, as the end user, have to trust that the AI results are accurate, that they're not wildly hallucinating,
Yeah.
making up things, references, whatever the case may be, because that will quickly erode trust. And if that continues to happen, you're not going to use it anymore. You have to make sure that the results are fast, they're being produced for you quickly, and frankly, cost effectively. I think one of the things that you mentioned with regards to tokens is a fascinating challenge that is now only really becoming uncovered. And let me explain what I mean by that. So, when we as consumers buy access to products like Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI ChatGPT, we pay a fixed fee. Maybe it's
Mhm.
$20, $50, $100, and we use the product more or less unlimited in an unlimited fashion as we like. And the reason why that's available is because those companies are subsidizing really what's happening under the hood. So you could
Ah.
be consuming a lot of the currency of AI, which we call tokens, in your process, but they try to obfuscate that by just saying, hey, pay us $20 and off you go. Now, that is not happening in enterprises. What's happening
Mhm.
actually in enterprises today is they actually have to pay for those tokens as they consume the AI and insights today. So, more recently in the headlines, Meta has been making tremendous headlines for kind of an internal competition that they've had running called token maxing,
Oh.
where their developers are actually being measured by the quantity of tokens that they're using. And these developers are spinning up agents and they're running 24/7. And the more tokens they consume, there's a leaderboard, a dashboard that actually shows who's been using the most tokens.
Hmm.
When you add it all up for the last 30 days, that cost is roughly $1 billion in tokens. Now, obviously, this is Meta. They have their own infrastructure. But if it wasn't Meta, that's how much you would have had to pay for a traditional model, an Anthropic model, for example, which is insane. Now, the thing about the reason why that's happening is those models are general purpose models. They're large language foundational models trained on the knowledge of a big portion of the internet, designed to be able to react to any query that a user might have. So any person could come to it. A student could come to it and want it to write an essay or a report. A doctor could go to it, a product manager, whatever, you name it,
Mhm.
salesperson, and it's prepared to spit out answers for you. The reality of enterprise AI use, though, is that's not the case. You have very specific roles in an organization, and you can optimize for those roles. In doing so, you can actually take those massive foundation models and shrink them down, make them smaller, make them a lot more purpose built, much more specific to the function and the needs that function has. For
Mhm.
example, things like optical character recognition. Think about going to a restaurant and having a lunch and taking a picture of the receipt and wanting to scan that receipt for the data that's there and then
Mhm.
lift that data up and maybe put it into some other document. That's pretty common. You could be doing this for proposals or invoices. So you want that capability to be very good. And then you want to be able to take that information and put it into systems that you use. For example, maybe it's Expensify or Ramp or QuickBooks or whatever it is, and be able to automate those processes. Those are repeatable functions that organizations have now. So what we're doing at AISquared is we're really trying to focus in on those highly repeatable functions and build models just for that. So
Mhm.
we're not really interested in the student who's writing a research paper or the doctor, unless it's a specific healthcare use case. We are focused on the repeatable functions. And in doing so, we make the models a lot smaller. By making the models smaller, they use less tokens and they're a lot more accurate. So this is actually something we've just recently released. It's a new model family, much smaller. It's still large. We have different versions of it, all the way down to small language models. Small language models you can actually run on your laptop or even on your phone. So that reduces the amount of processing costs that you might have. And it's very fast. So you can get your responses a lot quicker than you can if you otherwise had to wait for a very large model going through all of its knowledge.
Yeah.
So a lot to cover there, but a lot of innovation yet to be had in this entire space, which is super exciting.
That's interesting Because I would think most people would think, oh, the larger the model, the better. And we're approaching almost, I think it was like almost a billion model size, whatever the word is
Trillions,
for that.
trillion. Yeah.
But you were saying that the smaller ones are actually more cost efficient and runs better in some enterprise functions and case studies. That's fascinating.
100%. Yeah. And if you think about the way that the large language models got created, they were just a compilation of a bunch of small models. And those small models got put together into one larger model. And that's how the foundation labs often went. And that's great. That definitely works when you need a general purpose approach. But so what happens in the enterprise is you need to understand the individual and their role. And so we call that identity management, like what that person does. Say, for example, I'm a salesperson. So perhaps I'm interested in things like Salesforce data and sales forecasting data and license. If I was selling software, license access. So you have to have different components of the technology to make this entire system work. So you want to have things like identity. So you know that Darren is a sales guy and as a result should have access to these things. Then you probably want to have something like a model router, which is basically like another model which makes a decision on what models to go and call on to activate. And then those models then need to be available, and they could be a bunch of them. We have over 2,000 models in our model marketplace, each of them completely different in the way that an end user might use it. Some of them are healthcare, some of them are financial, some of them have to be PCI compliant, some have to be more cybersecure than others. So the model router needs to understand which models to go and select. When you build all those components together, you can create a lot more efficient approach and a lot more accurate and a lot more tuned to that organization's requirements, their needs. Maybe they have specific decision makers that want to see data in a particular way. Maybe they want to see who made the decision before. There's a lot of different ways we build companies up. And that's really what we're trying to optimize for at AISquared is really understand the business process, the workflow, and build AI for them.
But there's a lot of talk and excitement around AI agents, and they're starting to get deployed now. But we're also seeing examples where deployed agents maybe either underperform or create new operational risks. I think Claude just erased somebody's database in seconds a few days ago.
Yes.
So, where do you think agentic AI is headed today? And where do companies need to kind of maybe slow down and be more realistic in their deployment process?
I think the first thing there is guardrails. One of the things that because we came out of the Department of Defense, we had to have very tight guardrails in our system, which means that the results from the models need to be run and scrubbed for accuracy before they can be shared with an end user. And those guardrails, organizations tend to forget or maybe intentionally ignore when they're trying to go fast. And we've certainly seen that a lot. Some of the OpenClaw things that had happened over the last few months resemble that. Entire Gmail accounts being deleted because someone simply said, hey, eliminate unnecessary email. And OpenClaw said, these are all unnecessary, so let's get rid of all of them.
Oh,
Or similarly for the code base, hey, clean up my code base. The best kind of code is no code. That's the cleanest. So let's go ahead and delete all the lines of code, for example. As we now recognize these problems are happening, we now understand how much more specific we need to be with the instructions given to these independent agents, and more specifically, what kind of guardrails we have to put around them to ensure that they can't run off the rails, for example, and overcharge a credit card or delete
yeah.
code base, to your point.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't even imagine that.
So we have our own agents at AISquared, and what
Cool.
we're trying to do is figure out a way to deliver. So an agent is the definitions in all of this AI stuff is pretty nebulous. There's a lot of different people calling things differently. The way we define an agent is basically like an action. If you need an action taken, for example, something that a human would do, effectively that's an agent. So when you think about the workflow, which is a combination of actions, say, for example, you take that receipt I gave you earlier and you scan it and you have all the data, and now you want to put that data into your expense software. So what would happen in the past is I'd get my receipt and I'd give it to my assistant and she'd look at it and type that into Expensify, and boom, now I have that data put in there. All of that can be done with models, which will take the image, capture the image, remove the information, and an agent that could take that information and put it in the right locations. So what we're trying to do is create end-to-end agents so that you're not missing a step. I guess is the point I'm trying to make here. We believe that there are 7 steps to ensure that you have tight controls over AI and agents. And it includes everything from the way you access the data, the way you secure the data with things like encryption, to the way that the data is used within your system, and the way that it's brought to you in the way that we had described earlier. We call them embeddings, where you actually see and interact with the data. So there's things that you need to do, 7 steps, we believe, in interactions between the steps that ensures that you do it capably, reliably, safely. And when we deploy our agents, we call them the Sparks agent, and Sparks has a number of different workflows already. We also build into that the guardrail. So that way our customers are not having to think about those additional things that they may not be thinking about because they're very busy running their businesses. So
Yeah.
that's our job, to make sure that we put the guardrails and package this thing in a way where it allows them to be more effective at whatever it is that they're doing,
Yeah.
from proposal writing to quote to cash processes to accounts receivables, and you name it. We want to build end-to-end systems for them, complete agents with guardrails.
I love that. And to your point about specific instructions, I've even encountered that in my news writing sometimes, because you assume, as a human, you assume the person you're talking to kind of has some shared knowledge or shared experience, or at least can understand and relate to what you're saying. But sometimes the AI, especially when there's agents involved, they take it pretty literally. So you have to be real careful about what you ask it to do, because that could be crazy.
You're totally right. And the problem with designing the workflow for the agent is that we can only build for what we think we know.
Mhm.
And the reality is there's a lot of potential other things that we can't even think about. And as a result, we can't protect for.
Yeah.
And one of the challenges there is that when organizations are going really fast, they're building things and they're putting it into the wild. And we've talked about the terms in the past, like AI slop. I call
Mhm.
this agent slop, is when you're vibe coding agents and the agents don't have all the components required to make it work in a secure way. And you put it all in the wild, and there's trust on the other side. The buyer, the end user, assumes that this thing has been proven out and is safe to use, when in reality it wasn't. It was literally vibe coded over the weekend. That's what we're seeing today, right?
Yeah.
OpenClaw, Moltbook, for example, was vibe coded in a weekend. And we're seeing that happen more and more and more, which is super duper scary. So what we try to do at AISquared is we try to use our internal individuals as knowledge, and then we simulate a lot of these situations within our own secure sandbox for a period of time before we put it in the market. So today people are just shipping, they're pressing publish and their applications are going live instantaneously. We don't do that here. What
Yeah.
we have to do is we have a rigid process because we came out of the Department of Defense. There's a process which we follow and continue to follow today to ensure that these applications are safe, that they've been tested by the minimum requirements that we have set internally to ensure that the end user trust is going to be preserved because it's not going to run amok.
And it's great that you brought up vibe coding, because I was going to ask, where do you see vibe coding actually helping development, but also where does the human expertise still need to come into play?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that vibe coding, natural language approaches are the future. I think what we're going to see is a lot more creativity because you're going to have people that otherwise wouldn't have been able to design or build applications now doing so because of natural language interfaces. So that's cool, right? We're going to see
Mhm.
new applications addressing and solving new problems that we probably couldn't have before because of the old systems that we had in place. So
Yeah.
I think that's really great. The reality, though, is that we're still pretty far, I think, from having true end-to-end 100% built by vibe coding applications. Like,
Yeah.
databases still require fine tuning. There's still cybersecurity that is constantly changing, and you have to review the software bill of materials behind the code that's generated to ensure that they're truly patched, if you will. The
Mhm.
whole Anthropic mythos release that they claim to have pulled back because it was too powerful for the world and could be
Yeah.
used for malicious purposes. That's a part of it. I think we have to still have technologies that will grow as vibe coding applications grow. These other technologies, the ecosystem also needs to grow to ensure that those vibe coding applications are truly safe, truly usable. So I think the human is going to be required, in particular at the finishing level, for a very long time. The last 20%, understanding databases and truly properly producing schema at scale. How do you design architectures that can scale around the world and address the different laws and requirements that different countries have, the local data privacy requirements, residency requirements, compliance with things like GDPR? You can do a lot of that through an AI wrapper, but the finishing touches still always need to be reviewed by a human. And just
Hmm.
think about it again, like a piece of writing that you might do. You might have ChatGPT or Anthropic produce a long blog, for example, but actually reviewing it to make sure that it's right, that still needs to be done by you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the exact same thing we see with code still.
Yeah. That is 100% true. I can attest to that with my news writing. Even today, I was fighting with ChatGPT and it was just like, dude, come on.
Yeah,
We've gone over this. You're not adding the meaning. It's
true.
like it sets it up and then no punchline. And I'm like, what is happening? But it makes it sound like it's really good and really authoritative. And so, yeah,
Yes.
AI is not quite there yet. It's not going to quite replace human judgment, in my opinion. We still have a lot to go in that regard.
Yeah, just anyone who's ever tried to create an image using Nano Banana, I think Nano Banana is great. It's a cool tool. It
Hmm.
gets you pretty close to it. But if you've ever tried to, like, I was trying to build a background like the one I have here for my office, and we wanted to localize it, for example, with different images of our people around the world. Some of
Oh,
them are
cool.
in Miami, or some of them are in Europe, or whatever it is. And we have plugged away trying to vibe code that picture in every possible way. And every time you do that, something changes. And sometimes it's completely whacked out and you have to
Yeah.
revert. It takes a lot more time than if I would have just hired a graphic designer today to do it right the first time, as an example. So I agree with you. We're going to get there, but we're
Hmm.
still pretty, and these are very practical things. I'm thinking anyone who's watching this
Yeah.
probably has experienced this, but this is happening all over the place. And we're spinning up a lot of those tokens, back to the whole token thing,
Right.
right? Just retrying and retrying for hours and hours on end.
Yeah.
That's the reality of AI today.
Yeah. And you mentioned trust and security earlier. How should leaders think about balancing the speed of adoption with the governance and security and accountability that needs to go into all this?
Yeah, every organization is going to have a different approach to it. I definitely think that we are skipping a step when it comes to governance and security, in lieu of trying to go fast and show the markets that we're reacting quickly. That's going to probably catch up. If you think about the infrastructure from 20, 30 years ago, when IT was really coming up and new architectures and technologies are being deployed, what came from that is things like IT governance committees that were checking in to make sure that systems were working properly on a regular basis, not just on a one-time basis.
Hmm.
Hey, let's form a committee, build the project, and then put the project out there, and then let's disband the committee. No, these are committees that oftentimes stay together for a while, making sure that the results are accurate and continue to be persistent. And those kinds of things, frankly, we still need to have set up for AI. Governance committees that are focusing on things like end user experience, hallucination, drift detection, ethics, bias, etc. And how close or how far are we from that? Do we have any incidents from that? There's cybersecurity concerns that we need to continually monitor. So that perspective needs to be brought in here. Has our workflows been hacked? Do we have shadow IT? Do we have
Hmm.
organizations, even within our own company, spinning up their own AI projects, building workflows to data sources that maybe they shouldn't have access to, but it's happening? And I have, me as the CIO, for example, I have no visibility on it. Those things we need to weed out over time. And the only way you can do that, I think, is by bringing a cross-sectional function of leaders across your business together to
Hmm.
identify them, to cite the problems. Maybe it's latency, it's too slow. And as a result, my end users aren't using it. Maybe it's things that are being missed. Hey, I just spun up this new RAG database and I did it in a SaaS environment when you're a financial company and you should be running everything on-prem. That's going to have to happen over time. So I think you can definitely build it, but then you need this group of people to work on making it better and making it more reliable.
Yeah. It feels like the governance and the security stuff and everything has just been tacked on at the end. And I don't quite understand why it wasn't integrated with the process from the beginning. Do you have any insight onto
Yeah,
that?
I think so, because we talked to over 100 IT leaders deploying AI. The first problem is that everyone There's a FOMO. There's a
Oh,
FOMO effect,
yeah.
fear of missing out. Everyone thinks that everyone else is moving fast and that they have to keep pace. And as a result, those types of things like regulation, governance, those controls are the first thing to go out the window because they slow a process down. So,
Mm.
first of all, if you're really pushing hard, your CEO is saying we're going to be all AI by the end of the quarter, those things have to go out the window because you won't make those deadlines if you had them in place, right? That's just the reality of it. And it's also an indicative characteristic of where we are maturity wise. We're very early in the maturity curve. We're pretty immature as a society, I think, on deploying AI right now. So I think that's the biggest thing is that they're trying to show value fast. And as a result, you have to not worry about those things. We'll deal with that later. And to your point, that's when they're like, oh, it's later. Let's
Yeah,
build
now
that
it's
and
later
tack it
and
on. Yeah,
somebody did this and now who's going to be responsible for that? Yeah.
exactly. Yes.
We were just talking about FOMO and feeling the pressure to move fast and deploy fast with AI, but there's also a fear about making the wrong long-term decisions. So, looking ahead, what decisions about AI infrastructure or adoption do you think companies need to get right now before it becomes harder to fix later?
The biggest thing that I see, and this is a constant, and this is the one thing I would say, I have a lot of views on this topic, but what we tend to find is that because AI is new, organizations, particularly bigger ones, are afraid of bringing third parties in. So what they tend to do is they're like, oh no, we're going to have to bring our own AI expert in, and we're going to have to select our own set of tools, and we're going to have to build our own workflows, and we have to hire a team. And I can't tell you how many times I've talked to CIOs, CAIOs on this topic. So if you're further along in the maturity curve, what we've heard constantly is that I'll give you an example of one particular group where it's a large hospital system,
Mhm.
and their CIO told me, hey, when we got started, we just had to control everything and we didn't know what we wanted to do and we wanted the flexibility. So we decided to hire some people and we hired a few people and that became 250 data scientists, right?
Wow.
Big, bigger than most companies even developing and building an AI these days. And then we took a step back more recently and we realized we're spending a lot of money, we're building a lot of things that don't necessarily matter, and we're not experts at AI. Even though we've been building this for some time now, we are clinicians, we're doctors. Our job is to satisfy our patients, right? And that's what we need to get back to core on. And as a result, we need to hire organizations that just think about this problem every day, the infrastructure problem. They get up and they think about how do I make sure the pipelines are safe and secure? How do I put an SLA, a service level agreement, to make sure that there's no downtime around this thing? How do I make sure there's redundancy? And if a pipeline does fail, there's something that can switch over and keep the entire system up and running. And I think that's where I'll give you another example in this area. Another example is what we see oftentimes is that when you're building it yourself, you're going pretty fast. You tend to maybe not have the best documentation on who built what.
Mhm.
So fast forward now 6 months to a year, the pipeline goes down, something's not working, maybe an AI widget is coming up with null values, and you're like, what happened? Who do I call? I don't know. Who built that pipeline? Oh, that was Dave. Dave quit 3 months ago, or he got
Wow.
promoted, or he's working on a different project.
Yeah.
So how do we fix this? Oh, yeah. So now you end up spending 6 weeks trying to diagnose the problem, bringing it back up. And when you finally bring it back up, you've lost a lot of trust on the end user side.
Right.
So what I say here is that when you're starting your journey, just keep in mind what your purpose is, what your value is, right? If you're a hospital system and your purpose is to serve your clients, which are patients, work with a trusted entity to bring in the technologies that can actually help
Mhm.
you deploy this sustainably over time, right? With that level of confidence. So I think that's the one thing I would say is that, of
Yeah.
course, anyone can build anything themselves, but if you think about scale, you're probably going to want to take a look at bringing in partners. You go further together.
I love that advice because, like you said, if you're a healthcare facility, technology and AI is not your first expertise. So it makes sense to bring in a trusted partner rather than trying to do it yourself.
Right.
I love that.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up, I always love to ask when you do step away from your work, what are some activities or hobbies you're passionate about?
Wow, I AI is one of those things where it's
Yeah.
also my passion outside of work. The basic stuff right now, I've been taking a lot of classes, trying to get more knowledgeable on what they're doing. I'm actually pursuing my own PhD on AI right now, so I'm doing a lot of theoretical writing research on that topic. So really, my entire life today is around AI, whether
Hmm.
it's in the work that we do for our customers, but then also how do we help the broader ecosystem of AI? We're thinking a lot these days about how do we bring AI to the underexposed people, organizations. So, for example, nonprofits. We recently launched an initiative to help nonprofits, smaller nonprofits,
Oh,
to be able to compete with AI. So,
that's
AI is
nice.
powerful, right? It's leverage. But larger organizations can afford it, larger nonprofits can afford it, but the smaller ones, the 10, 15, 20 person nonprofit, maybe can't. And they're so busy just keeping the lights on that they're not even thinking about it. And maybe they're even afraid of AI.
Yeah.
So, is there a way for us to help them overcome that fear by bringing some of our capabilities to help them find the next grant or to be more efficient, right? So instead of having people pass papers, maybe those people are actually out there delivering food or soliciting donations, right? So we put people into the high value functions and we use AI to help fill in the gaps in between. Those kinds of things I think a lot about these days, and I'm trying to help solve through the broader AISquared, but also through the work I'm doing outside of AISquared.
That's so great to hear about the smaller nonprofits because I think about them and other small businesses a lot. That's my background actually, is more small businesses. And I'm like, they aren't getting the attention right now. And I'm like, I know it's the enterprises and they have to kind of test things out first and then we'll get them the next round. But it's nice that there's people like you that are looking out for the smaller nonprofits that can't do much more than, like you said, keep the lights on. So that's awesome.
No, and we're thrilled to help. It's not just us, right? I think there's a
Right.
lot of people with the knowledge and capabilities that are also thinking big picture, like how do we help society with this technology?
Yeah.
And I think that's how we rising tide floats all boats. I think that's how we rise the tide. We push hard, obviously, in our day jobs, and we want to get our AI technology deployed as wide as we can, but then we also have to give back to society.
Yeah.
Happy to do
Like you
that.
said, we're better together.
Yes, yes. We definitely go further together. Yes.
Yes, I love that. Darren, thank you so much for sharing your insights on AI adoption and why it stalls and where agentic AI is creating the real value, especially how businesses can turn AI from a pilot to something that delivers real operational impact. I just really appreciate the conversation and you joining us today.
Alicia, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, yeah. And for those of you who'd like to learn about AI Squared, you can visit their website, AISquared.ai. Keeping you connected to tomorrow. Today, this is Alicia with AInews.com.